B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Friday, April 19th, 2019. Seasonal greetings to those who celebrate Easter and Passover this weekend. And it's happened 4 times before in my life. But my birthday falls on Easter Sunday this year. And there's the old Catholic line about being the truth, the way, and the light. I'll settle for a little truth and a little light. And yes, it is my boxcar birthday. That is a reference to craps. Boxcar is double sixes. So last night I had plans in the evening. I got home. I consumed some corporate media. I read a part of the Mueller report. And I'm going to focus on Mueller exclusively in today's podcast. And my opening question to you is a big one. It relates to my ongoing distrust of Robert Mueller. And last night I posted on Facebook to some friends, can we take the halo off St. Bob now? He just outdid Nixon with an elaborate limited hangout investigation. He's a lifetime Republican, and because he wasn't an independent counsel, it's not surprising that he didn't indict, he didn't name Trump as an unindicted co-conspirator, or even make a formal referral to Congress on the obstruction issues. The Democrats are huffing and puffing, but Mueller knows they won't impeach Trump. So he laid out some facts, avoided conclusions with a sop to the rights of the uncharged. And that last comment, Mueller said that after he laid out the 10 instances of probable obstruction of justice, that it wouldn't be fair to Trump for Mueller to reach a conclusion because there's no legal process for Trump to defend himself. And I think that speaks volumes to the bias of the man who was named special counsel in this 20-month investigation. And there are many people who still have great confidence in Mueller. They're quoting the report to advance their existing opinions. We'll get to some of that in a moment. But fundamentally, nobody questions the credibility of Bob Mueller. Nobody asks whether this is a, complete report. Oh, they draw the point that Donald Trump didn't talk to Mueller's investigation. But there's so many other people that, as far as we know, were never contacted by Mueller. And in one passage that I read last night, Mueller makes decisions and judgments about the credibility of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. But he never talked to them. He didn't send an investigator to London. And because Bill Barr released it's a medium, he called it lightly redacted. I wouldn't call it heavily redacted, but there are a total of 1,000 redactions. And in the area that I focused on, the claims of the Russian information campaign influencing American voters, sowing discord, using disinformation to confuse people. And then the section on the reported hacking of the DNC. And I'm going to criticize some corporate media people who won't move on from their pre-Mueller report notions. And I must be candid with you, my listeners, that I'm in the same boat to some extent. Now, before we dive into those parts, one of the things that really bugs me is the statement that's included in one of the early summary passages of the Mueller report, that in 2016 there was sweeping and systematic Russian interference in the election. And as he goes on to describe the information campaign run by the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, grossly exaggerating the impact that they had. And then he goes to the WikiLeaks DNC hack versus leak discussion. And the redactions frustrate a guy like me because if Mueller actually disclosed the source of evidence that he used to draw his conclusions, I am so far not permitted to see it. And so when you go to the report, I've linked to the official Justice Department version that is available to you as a PDF. And I went to Section 3, Russian Hacking and Dumping Operations. It starts on page 36. So let me just scroll down here for a moment, and I have some notes to comment as I quote from the Mueller report. I declined to kill enough trees to print the whole thing out, so I do have it on my screen here. And what I find interesting is that Mueller's indictment of the GRU that was issued last July 13th, it was on Friday the 13th, I remember it vividly, and he indicted 12 or 13 officers of the GRU. He named them. He named the units of the GRU that they work for. He offered specific information about that makes it appear that we were able to hack into the GRU hackers' den and know who was on duty on a given night and who was participating in a team that created, according to Mueller, Guccifer 2.0 and DC leaks. So what he is doing here, and let me underscore, that in an indictment, even a detailed indictment, is not evidence. It has to be tried in a court of law, and that's where we determine whether it is confirmed or merely an allegation. So the indictment is a set of allegations, and in this document, Mueller, cleverly some would say, not I, uses the indictment as the evidence that the DNC was hacked. I found no mention of Bill Binney. I found no effort to explore the idea that it was an insider leak. There is a passage where WikiLeaks is attacked for suggesting that Seth Rich may have been responsible for the insider leak. But we don't see any more evidence, at least not in this redacted version, than there was in these bullshit CIA assessments, the intelligence community memos, one issued in October of 16, the other in January of 2017. Those assessments helped amplify the Democratic Party generated idea that Russia had interfered in the election. And so, as I read this passage, this section of the Mueller report, they build a strong case, and Mueller leaves a strong impression that it was Russian intelligence agents solely responsible for collecting the information that ultimately ended up either at WikiLeaks, DC Leaks, or Guccifer 2.0. He identifies the different departments of the GRU, one whose military unit is 26165, the other 74455. We'll just use 65 and 55 if we refer to them. And in a kind of omniscient voice, Bob Mueller says, for example, GRU officers sent hundreds of spear-phishing emails to the work and personal email accounts of Clinton campaign employees and volunteers. How do we know that? What is the basis for that statement? Now, we know that John Podesta was the victim of a spear-phishing attack. But we also know, and maybe you're tired of hearing me say this, that these kinds of intrusions can be blamed on other people. A false flag hack. And it was the Vault 7 hacking tools in a program called Marble that brings that evidence to the forefront, but we know that the capability has been there for a long time. And again, basically just paralleling the indictment from last summer, the narrative here doesn't offer the kind of evidence that I've been looking for. For example, based on information collected by the National Security Agency, based on information derived from a human intelligence source, No, we're not allowed to know that. Now, there are quite a few redactions related to this, and they are coded for investigative technique. And I don't need to know the technique necessarily. I can understand they want to protect that. But this is as frustrating as the releases that we have seen to date. And as I mentioned, the language of the Mueller report related to the collection of materials and then the distribution of them does not add, for me, any new information about exactly how it happened, when it happened. They don't tell us, for example, that they found traffic on a certain network that convinced them that it was the GRU that did it. It is simply asserted repeatedly. And we know that Bill Binney and his colleagues at Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity believe that DC leaks and Guccifer 2.0 are concocted, it's hard to call them people, entities. And again, Mueller simply states that GRU officers using the DC Leaks persona gave certain reporters early access to archives of leaked files by sending them links and passwords to pages on the DC Leaks website that had not yet become public. Here's an example. July 14th, 2016, GRU officers operating under the DC Leaks persona sent a link and password for a non-public DC Leaks webpage to a U.S. reporter via the Facebook account. Now, that links to footnote 143. And we go to that footnote, and it says Facebook message with an ID number, and then the name of the reporter is blacked out under the claim of personal privacy. So we're not allowed to know. And I want to admit at this point, Mueller may have the evidence behind all this. And we may get confirmation, indirectly, from members of Congress who may ultimately see the full report without any redaction. But basically, Bob Mueller is continuing the intelligence community's game of trust me. And I think you know, I don't trust the intelligence community, and I don't trust Bob Mueller. One of the real astounding claims is that in July of 2016, Trump looked into a camera. He was in Florida, and he said, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you can find those Clinton emails." And Mueller asserts, again, without offering us even a hint of evidence, that 5 hours later, GRU officers hacked into some computer with Hillary Clinton emails on it. Now consider, this was near the end of July 2016. Hillary Clinton's email server had been in the news, and if they hadn't removed emails from that server in the bathroom in Chappaqua, then Hillary Clinton is not nearly as smart as I think she is. And the other big piece, when we look at the claims that Mueller makes to support his claim of sweeping and either systemic or systematic Russian interference, the exaggeration of the impact of the IRA, the Russian troll farm, is it's outrageous. And Mueller doesn't attempt to place it in any context, and neither do the media reporters who pull on this and say, look, Russia caused Americans to change their minds. They used disinformation. They sowed discord. They ran phony ads. They set up rallies and 10 people showed up. And this is described as sweeping interference. But they never talk about the billions in free media that Trump got to spew his hateful commentary. They never talk about the $80 million the Trump campaign spent on social media alone, with dark messages that were targeted in a dark manner. What do I mean by that? Racist or dog whistle themes that were sent to people who they had used the data collection methods to identify as receptive to a racist message. And so we are left with most people, I think, dissatisfied by the Mueller report. And while we see the Democrats making a lot of noise about we need the full report, we need Mueller to testify, oh, they are so afraid of impeachment. They keep dancing around it. So let me just read to you the headline from the front page of the print edition of Friday's New York Times. Mueller report lays out Russian contacts and Trump's frantic efforts to foil inquiry. Now, the lead headline is the Mueller report lays out Russian contacts. Then the subheadline reads, no charges of criminal conspiracy and no judgment on obstruction. Those are accurate, but if you only read the major headline, you would believe that Mueller has laid out Russian contacts that are problematic. Well, the Mueller report clearly says that there's not a single American who colluded, conspired, or connected with Russians who were attempting to influence our election. And when you dive into the middle of the paper, pages A12 and A13 are what they call a double truck. It's in the center of the paper, and it occupies 2 full pages. It is a chart and graph with pictures. Mueller report shows depth of connections between campaign and the Russians. Of the more than 100 contacts, the special counsel said there was insufficient evidence that there had been a criminal conspiracy. Then why are you trying to offer proof of a criminal conspiracy by 100 people who had contacts, or 100 contacts between Trump operatives and Russia? They are continuing, the corporate media, to try to persuade people that their false reporting over the last couple of years was accurate. Here's another subheadline inside the paper. Mueller report details contact with Russians. What do I have over here? Okay. So those are my quotes from the paper today. Now, BuzzFeed has been on the hot seat since January 17 when my old pal Jason Leopold and a colleague reported that based on 2 sources who had been in the room when Michael Cohen spoke to prosecutors, that Trump had directed him to lie to Congress, and that word directed is critical. This caused one of the few utterances from the Mueller investigation. And they quickly said that the statement is not correct. It's not accurate, was the term that they used. So Ben Smith has finally broken his silence on this, and in a kind of long-winded piece that doesn't include an apology, it's more of a clarification. He says, today with the release of the Mueller report, we know which characterization that Mr. Carr, Mueller's spokesman, was disputing. Specifically, that the series of interactions between Trump, Cohen, and their lawyers didn't, in the prosecutor's view, amount to Trump directing Cohen to lie. So Smith writes, as a matter of what constitutes a crime, Mueller has the last word, and his characterization has the force of law. We'll be updating our original story with a link to this piece. And then he says he wants us to know how this evolved. The original reporting included documents. It was based on documents. They didn't show them to us. Pages of notes that were taken during an interview of Cohen by the FBI. In these notes, one law enforcement source wrote that DJT personally asked Cohen to say negotiations ended in January, and White House counsel knew Cohen would give false testimony to Congress. Sanctioned by DJT. Joint lawyer team reviewed letter Cohen sent to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence about his testimony about Trump Tower, Moscow, knowing it contained lies. Now, that is not the same as someone being directed, coached, led. There are many ways, and BuzzFeed suffers from its reliance on that word directed. So Smith goes on, the Mueller report finds that Cohen lied, and he did so at what he believed to be the president's behest. The facts of Cohen's lies and his interactions with Trump are largely now settled. Our sources, federal law enforcement officials, interpreted the evidence Cohen presented as meaning that the president directed Cohen to lie. We now know that Mueller did not interpret it that way. So it's just a matter of interpretation. And BuzzFeed, so far as I've seen, and I haven't been at their website a lot, they appear to have no apologies for releasing the Steele dossier, which provided a lot of misleading information, or the reporting that BuzzFeed has done on Russiagate over the past 2 years. Glenn Greenwald, in a piece at The Intercept today, says that Mueller didn't merely reject the Trump-Russia conspiracy theories, he obliterated them. He says, in an undeniable and definitive manner. I'm going to give you some quotes here. Mueller, in addition to concluding that evidence was insufficient to charge any American with crimes related to Russian election interference, also stated emphatically in numerous instances there was no evidence that key prongs in this 3-year-old conspiracy theory actually happened. As Mueller himself put it, in some instances, the report points out the absence of evidence or conflicts in the evidence about a particular fact or event. So in addition to exonerating all Americans for any involvement, Mueller does, make the claim that there was this sweeping effort by Russia to influence us, but that nobody tried to collaborate with them. And Greenwald notes that the contacts with Russians before the installation of Trump in January of 17 were brief, public, non-substantive, and that includes the contact that Jeff Sessions was beaten up for by former Senator Al Franken, who at the time we thought was very effective in cornering Sessions. But Mueller didn't find anything there. Also, no members of the family, including Crown Prince Jared or Don Trump Jr., were indicted, and it sure seemed to me like they were lying. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. And that was not found to be the case. Regarding Carter Page, the investigation did not establish that Page coordinated with the Russian government in its efforts to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. And if Bill Barr does go through with his threat to investigate the investigators, what was the triggering action that led the FISA court to issue the warrants, and there were several, on Carter Page? Well, these things will dangle in many respects. Greenwald also singles out John Brennan, the former CIA director, who just a month ago was predicting that Mueller would be issuing another flurry of indictments before he shut down his investigation. Greenwald also attacks the Guardian of London that he used to work for, despite an extensive discussion of Manafort's activities. Nothing in the report even hints, let alone states, that he ever visited Julian Assange at the embassy. How the Guardian could justify still not retracting that false story is mystifying. Then he takes on BuzzFeed. Then he takes on Rachel Maddow. She certainly deserves it. He doesn't mention Bill Maher, but Bill deserves to be in the same group. Then Marcy Wheeler, the empty wheel blogger. And I have never been a fan of Marcy's. She's an interesting, smart woman, but her take on this always seemed jaundiced to me. And let's see, here's more from Greenwald. Mueller makes clear that the Trump campaign not only knew that Russia was interested in helping it win the election, but was happy to have that help. There's clearly nothing criminal about that. One can debate whether it's unethical and in poor taste. I added the poor taste part. So I think that Greenwald has done a good job. Near the end, he says this massive investigation simply did not establish any of the conspiracy theories that huge parts of the Democratic Party, the intelligence community, and the U.S. media spent years encouraging the American public to believe. Another good takedown piece that was published a couple of weeks ago at Medium by Kevin Gostola. It's a longer piece, and maybe that's why it didn't get published, or I didn't see it at Shadowproof, his home base. But he does a great job of taking us back through the process of how the Democrats pushed Russiagate And he says it's time to reckon with the Clinton Democrats who pushed it on us. And he names Robbie Mook and many of the people at the highest ranks of the Clinton campaign. I think it's a worthy read, and I hope you'll check it out. The other piece that I find baffling is, at least in my social media, on my Facebook news feed, there are so many Clinton supporters who are now just sniping at Bernie Sanders on a daily basis, rehashing arguments from the 2016 campaign. He's not a Democrat. He brought Hillary down. He was duped by the Russians. It is bizarre. And that is the state of play, unfortunately, in the U.S. today. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the PBC podcast with your subscriptions. People like Suzanne Bowen, Aidan McAleer, Lee Hirschkorn, and Faith Peoples. They each kick in a few bucks a month or $50 a year. You can do it too. I've got bonus books for new annual subscribers who give me a continental U.S. mailing address. It's the book 2100, this graphically rich set of blueprints for climate change adaptation. I'd love to send a copy to you. All you have to do is check in and set up a new annual subscription. And by the way, I am accepting birthday gifts. If you want to kick in a few dollars to support the podcast, just go to the sign-up page at peterbcollins.com, and you can either set up a new subscription or make a one-time contribution using PayPal. And, of course, if you're allergic to PayPal, my mailing address is Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, zip code 94915. Well, as you know, I have long believed that Donald Trump should be impeached. I said so starting in 2017. And it's unpopular with the Democrats. They've decided it's a losing proposition, and it's bad for them politically. And as you know, I deeply disagree. So the Democrats have filed a subpoena to get the full Mueller report, and both Judiciary Chair Nadler and Speaker Pelosi have pledged rigorous congressional oversight. But they dance around the word impeachment. Here's Nadler. The idea is not to decide whether to debate articles of impeachment. We may get to that point. The idea is to find out exactly what went on, who did what institutional safeguards were gotten around, and how they were gotten around, and then decide what to do about it. So they're going to gum it to death. They're already saying that there's too little time before the 2020 election to launch an impeachment. That's because they wasted a lot of time waiting for the Mueller report. Of course, Trump seizes on this to activate his base. Here's a tweet. Statements are made about me by certain people in the crazy Mueller report itself, written by 18 angry Democrat Trump haters, which are fabricated and totally untrue. Because I never agreed to testify, it wasn't necessary for me to respond to statements made in the report about me, some of which are total bullshit and only given to make the other person look good or me to look bad. So he is going to keep using this, A, to claim that he's been exonerated, and B, to claim that any further investigations are just part of the witch hunt. And this is where Democrats have to stand up for the constitutional principles. Adam Schiff, who postures as this big defender of the Constitution and the rule of law and truth, he said that he remains skeptical about impeachment. Many of us do think the president is unfit for office, but unless that's a bipartisan conclusion, an impeachment would be doomed to failure. I continue to think that a failed impeachment is not in the national interest, and so we'll see what's been redacted from this report. We'll continue to do our work. So if you support impeachment, Adam Schiff says, sit down, shut up. Maxine Waters, though, isn't sitting down, isn't shutting up. Quote, at this point, Congress' failure to impeach is complacency in the face of the erosion of our democratic and constitutional norms. Congress's failure to impeach would set a dangerous precedent and imperil the nation, as it would vest too much power in the executive branch and embolden future office holders to further debase the U.S. presidency, if that's even possible. And, you know, that is an important point, that we have accepted levels of corruption and outright lies, like Sarah Sanders claiming that when Comey was fired, it was because countless members of the FBI had lost faith in him. And Mueller succinctly says that Sarah Sanders' statement was not founded on anything. And her reaction is to claim that other people lied. Quote, "It was the heat of the moment, meaning it wasn't a scripted talking point. I'm sorry I wasn't a robot like the Democrat Party that went out for 2.5 years and stated time and again that there was definitely Russia collusion between the president and his campaign." So she's saying, yeah, I lied. But, of course, neener, they lied too. AOC is easing closer to a position of impeachment. She issued a tweet. Here it is. Mueller's report is clear in pointing to Congress' responsibility in investigating obstruction of justice by the president. It is our job. As such, I'll be signing on to Rashida Tlaib's impeachment resolution. Representative Al Green of Texas also supports impeachment. Joaquin Castro, running for president, he offered a question for Mueller. Would you move forward with impeachment proceedings? I think that's a cheesy cop-out. And Ocasio-Cortez sent a follow-up tweet. While I understand the political reality of the Senate plus election considerations, upon reading this report, which explicitly names Congress in determining obstruction, I cannot see a reason for us to abdicate from our constitutionally mandated responsibility to investigate. And get this, John Yoo, the guy who has lifetime tenure across the bay from me at UC Berkeley in the law school, the guy who wrote the torture memos for George W. Bush, well, he wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post today, and while he doesn't personally say he supports impeachment of Trump, he says, look, the Constitution establishes impeachment, not prosecution, as the answer to a corrupt sitting president. The Mueller report and Barr's decision not to prosecute do not end the matter. He can be referring only to impeachment, he says, referring to Mueller's report. John Yoo says impeachment doesn't require the president to commit a crime, but instead refers to significant political mistakes or offenses. And that's true. And he closes by saying the Constitution makes Congress alone, not prosecutors, accountable for firing or keeping a president accused of abusing the office. Mueller has recalled Congress to its constitutional duty. Let's see if it's willing to answer. And finally, related to the Mueller report today, it's interesting to note that Mueller was never going to, I think, recommend charges for Trump even on obstruction. But what we learned from the report is that there are 8 individuals who owed their political appointments to Trump, who refused to carry out clearly illegal orders. And let's briefly name them. These are Republicans. None of them are people that I respect or approve of. But number 1, Jeff Sessions. I think he is a low-life racist pig from Alabama. But he repeatedly refused to unrecuse himself, to fire Mueller. And it's reported that after he first offered to resign, and that was not accepted, Sessions carried a resignation letter in his pocket every time he went to the White House for a year afterward, until right after the midterm elections last year when his resignation was accepted. Don McGahn, the White House counsel, he offended Trump by taking notes. And Trump said Roy Cohn never took notes. And McGahn refused to publicly say that the president had not tried to get him to fire Mueller. Rick Dearborn is a guy we don't know very much about. He's a lower ranking. I don't even know if he's still at the White House. But he's a pal of Corey Lewandowski, the first campaign manager for Trump in 2016. And Trump asked Lewandowski to tell Sessions to unrecuse himself and to force Mueller to just investigate ways to prevent election interference in the future. Lewandowski just kind of tabled it. Then in a second meeting with Trump, the president asked, hey, did you get that message to Sessions? So Trump actually dictated a letter and asked Lewandowski to deliver it. He then handed it off to Dearborn, who was a deputy White House chief of staff, and Dearborn tossed it in the trash. Rob Porter, the guy who left the White House amid domestic violence accusations, he refused to call the number 3 ranking official at the Justice Department and dangle the promise of promotion to Attorney General if she would play ball. And here's a surprise. Chris Christie, in February of 2017, was asked by Trump to contact Comey and tell him that the president really likes him. Tell him he's part of the team. And Christie did not make any effort to make such a contact. Rod Rosenstein refused to hold a news conference when the president asked him to take the fall for firing, or the memo that rationalized the firing of James Comey. And let's see, I got 2 more here. Katie McFarland, who briefly served under Mike Flynn in the National Security Council, she refused a request from Trump to lie about the nature of the conversation between Mike Flynn and the Russian ambassador. And finally, Dan Coates, who currently serves as the Director of National Intelligence, refused to put out a statement when Trump asked him to, saying that no link existed between Trump and Russia. So the bottom line, friends, is that we have a corrupt president who ran a cover-up for what are still murky reasons. But there was a Democratic and deep state conspiracy to use whatever was available to try to humiliate Trump, reduce his ability to function as president, delegitimize him, and ultimately remove him from office. And as you know, I don't dispute the underlying issues except the Russiagate conspiracy. He is corrupt. He does deserve to be removed. And it's the Democrats who now control the House of Representatives who stand in the way. And this, friends, is a sorry day for what lingers as democracy here in the United States. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. Feel free to share it. It's unrestricted. You'll find it on YouTube. And I'm still Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.